All right, so we're going to continue talking about things that are going to allow me to dive deeper into things that are going to help you be more successful in your life. But first, we have to lay the foundation by which I can build upon for later videos so that I can reference this stuff so things make sense later on. So this one's going to sound pretty interesting, and then the next one's also going to sound pretty interesting, and then I promise by probably the end of next week, we'll be on to stuff that will have a lot more meaning and purpose to you in terms of everyday life. But this first initial stuff has to be explained first and foremost if the later stuff, if it'll make it more likely that the later stuff will make sense, because what we're going to be talking about in this video is how our reality is built. And if that sounds strange to you, cool, because it sounded strange to me at first as well, until I realized that this process of reality formation is just another way of saying that this is how we learn. And if we can learn how to learn, if we understand the process of learning, we can utilize that knowledge to learn faster, more effectively, and basically improve every facet of our lives. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the process by which our reality is created, or how we actually learn or take in information, process that information, and then, most importantly, output that information in the real world. So, let me begin by explaining this process. So, each individual's reality is constructed first by the available information or potential knowledge that can be gathered by an individual. This is known as the data input or grammar phase. Once the available information is gathered as random data or as structured information from other individuals, and it's taken in by the individual, and the individual takes that stuff and puts it into his mind, then the individual begins to process the data to gain understanding. This is the individual's ability to think. Our understanding is based upon the quality of the information that's available to us, the amount of information that's available to us, and the amount of information that the individual chose to process, and ultimately the individual's ability to process the information. This part is known as the data processing or logic phase. Once the data is processed and turned into information that can be used in terms of it actually being meaningful patterns that can be utilized for the individual, a course of action can be decided upon. And this course of action is based on the individual's understanding of the inputted information. The individual can then take an action or output in the real world. And this is recorded as our behavior or actions and is known as the data output or rhetoric phase, because for the most part, when we're interacting with other individuals, we are orating or communicating with them through language. And ultimately, each individual's behavior is based upon the quality of their decision-making processes, which in turn is based upon the quality of their available information. This process creates a generated result or a manifested reality around ourselves and is recorded as our actual behavior. This is the process that ultimately determines whether order or chaos is generated in our lives. And this is how all human realities are built. Data input, processing of that data, information, output. Data becomes information with formation. Data with form. That's all that information is. It's data that has form. And then mation is just matter. So when we're actually creating, or when we're taking these data structures and forming them into something, we're actually forming them into matter, into something that matters, something that has meaning for us, that we can utilize. It has a meaningful pattern to it that we can utilize in our everyday lives. That's what we're doing when we're taking stuff that we don't fully understand, chaos, unknown, and bringing it into our being, trying to understand it, forming patterns, locating the patterns, and finding meaning out of things that we didn't understand just a couple of days ago, simply by processing that information. So, I want you to understand, because this is very important. If we took in enough information and processed that information properly, then we generate order in our lives. If we didn't take in enough information, or if we didn't process the information properly, then we generate chaos in our lives. And I want to show you how this works with an example, and then we're going to continue talking about this stuff, because I don't want you to think about this stuff in terms of you physically seeing something and forming a reality around yourself. For the most part, you know what a tree is. You know what tables are, chairs are, books, computers, cars. You know what these things are, so these aren't random data structures to you. They've already been labeled. They've already been imbued with meaning. You've already formed those data structures into meaning, into information. They're information already. So what I'm really talking about is knowledge, is more intangible. So how do we actually gain knowledge of something that doesn't have any structure or form by way of it having physicality? Like you can't touch this stuff. So does this mean that this process of reality creation changes? No, it's the exact same process, and I want to run through this with you real quick with an example. Just a simple writing a term paper for, you're in college or something, you have to write a term paper, we'll say for the Peloponnesian War. So you need to write this term paper. That's your manifested result. That's the reality that you're going to create. That's the thing that's your goal, essentially. You're going to create this term paper. That has to happen. You have to hand that paper in. So how do we do that? Well, very simply, you do an internet search on the Peloponnesian War. And what you find is that there's a whole lot of information on the Peloponnesian War. There's a whole lot of information on pretty much everything online. So why would that be any different for the Peloponnesian War? Well, you see what comes out, and you get 3.19 million results for the Peloponnesian War. Now, you're not going to go through all of that information. You're going to select particular information, what we would hopefully deem as quality information, and utilize that information to process so you can quickly learn or form the reality of understanding behind the Peloponnesian War. So instead of going through 3.19 million results of the Peloponnesian War, you go to its Wikipedia page. So now you're down to just one page of information, and you don't stop there. You go down to the references section, and you check out possibly Donald Kagan's Peloponnesian War book and Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War book, and you utilize those as well. So now your information appears to be quality, and your information includes not 3.19 million results, but just the Wikipedia page and those two books. And so once you have gathered that information, you have to start the process of processing that information. And all that means is that you're reading the books, you're reading the Wikipedia page, you're processing the information, you're going through these already formed data structures, these already formed bits of information, and you at the individual level have to come to an understanding of this information. And you do that through reading the stuff, reading the material, taking notes, possibly creating a logical outline of all of this stuff. And once you evolve the information, and once you do that, and once you feel like you're confident in understanding what you're going to write about, then you actually start the process of outputting a behavior in the real world. And that's you creating the term paper. And so, as you should be able to see, your term paper will be completely dependent upon your ability to process. Well, first, it'll be completely dependent upon your access to available information. We're always going to assume that we have access to this endless stream of information simply because we have access to the internet. And as long as you have that, you should have access to all of the knowledge, all of human knowledge out there. So we have that. And then so next, it's dependent upon your ability to process this information, to select quality information and reject not quality information, because that's a big issue right now. We have information overload, so we have to pay attention to that as well. You have to select quality information and reject not quality information. And you do that through the processing of this information, through your thinking. Because you may get a book on the Peloponnesian War and realize halfway through that this book is nonsense. They're not telling me anything about the Peloponnesian War. This is useless. This is a waste of time. Reject that information. Don't just accept it simply because it's information. You want quality information. Quality information is quality because it has more meaning behind it. It's imbued with more meaning. It has more purpose. It has more use for us. That's the only difference between quality information and not quality information. So, this is why it becomes very important to understand the processing of information. And then further, so let's just take a step back here. I want to reassert this. If you have quality available information and quality processing abilities, then it follows that you will generate a quality term paper. This is manifested order. That's all that order means. It means that what you wanted out of life is what you got. That means you did good. Okay? That's what good is. Okay? So then understand. On the flip side, if you had poor available information and poor processing abilities, then it follows that you will generate a poor term paper. This is manifested chaos. Chaos occurs when your behavior and your actions don't create what you want out of life. That's all that chaos is in this term. So let's continue. If you had poor available information and quality processing abilities, then it follows that you will generate a poor term paper. Again, manifested chaos. This is because you had poor available information. It doesn't matter how quality your processing abilities are. If you only have access to poor information, then you will generate chaos in your life. And then likewise, if you had quality available information and poor processing abilities, then it follows that you will manifest a poor term paper or manifested chaos. That's sort of where we are today. Is this part? We have access to all of the information, both good and bad, and as long as we have access to quality information, which we all do, then that shouldn't be our problem. Our problem is in the processing phase of this situation. And then for those of us who do know how to process information, our problem tends to be in the actually taking action phase. Because you got to take action. You got to apply your knowledge. It doesn't matter how smart you are, because everything is recorded as our behavior. Our behavior is what is recorded in the annals of history. So, but the point here is that the only way to generate manifested order is to have quality available information and quality processing abilities, and then ultimately to take action in the real world. So, just want you to understand that this is how our reality is formed all around us. You have to first access available information, and then second, process that information. And then third, you have to take action in the real world and generate that which you want to create. And everything that you create and everything that you manifest must come into creation in this order. You can't do these things out of order. Simply going back to our example, if we were to write a term paper on the Peloponnesian War without first accessing available information on the Peloponnesian War, I think we would all agree that that term paper would come out as pure nonsense, because you didn't access any information on the Peloponnesian War. And if you don't know anything about the Peloponnesian War, then what are you even writing about? What could you possibly write about if you didn't first access available information? This is fairly obvious stuff. And then, we could even take that to the next step. It's like, why are you trying to do anything in your life until you have the full understanding of the processing of available information down pat as well? But the point that I'm trying to make here is a lot of people try to expect to have positive quality physical manifestations occur in their lives without first doing research, without first accessing available information. You hear a lot about people trying to start businesses without any A4 knowledge about the business that they're trying to create. They just think that they're going to be able to do it. And that's not going to work out. It's just not. You have to first process or access information, process that information, and then take action in the real world. And then on the flip side of that, obviously, is not taking action. You always have to, at the end of the day, apply the information, or you're not completing the reality creation circuit. So that's pretty much how everything's created. I want to get into one last point, and then we're going to leave this topic, and we're going to talk about something much more consciousness related, how consciousness interacts with this process, because consciousness does have a strong interaction with this process, and you have to be aware of it heading in, because if you're trying to access this information and you're not doing it with the right mindset, you're going to have a hard time. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. But let me just leave you with this. So ultimately, when you're accessing information, quality information isn't based upon who agrees with it or who disagrees with it, or how theoretically correct it is, or proper or judicial in its creation. It doesn't particularly matter about anything other than when you use it, does it create success for you? When you have quality information and you apply that quality information in your life, the only thing that determines that that information is quality is the success that it generates. So I was talking about accessing available information on starting a business. And what that sounds like is that I'm telling you to look into business in terms of its tactics and strategies. And, learning about product distribution and how to get a loan from a bank, or sales and marketing and stuff like that. And all of that stuff's important and good, and you can get some good information out of that. But comparatively to the number one trait of a business person, the number one trait of a business person is persistence. And when you define persistence, it's just persisting. It's having a passion. It's doing something for the sake of doing it and never stopping simply because you don't feel a wanting to stop. You want to keep going. You want to defy the odds. Now, none of that really has anything to do with business. It doesn't have anything to do with business tactics or strategy or any of that stuff. So it could be overlooked as not quality information for starting a business. But the issue with that is that success isn't determined by anything other than what is successful. So if persistence is the number one trait, the number one thing that you should probably know and understand before starting a business, then it doesn't matter that it doesn't really have anything to do with business. It's the most important thing that you should know, and thus it makes it the most quality information out there for you to possess. So I wanted to make that distinction first because of the example that I used, and second because this stuff is going to make you rethink what is important, what actually is quality information, and what is not. And that's something that I went through throughout my time trying to get as close to what actual true objective reality is, and then watching as the closer I get to true objective reality, the more the reality by which I exist in, by which we all exist in, started to crumble and become less meaningful. And so the point that I wanted to leave you with is reject anything that doesn't offer you success, that doesn't offer you happiness. And we'll talk about this more, but I figured since I'm introducing available information and we're broadening that horizon, we're not just talking about things that we see and touch and feel, but things that are much more intangible and much more exponentially expansive. For example, knowledge, access to available information, and stuff like that. So we'll continue talking about this process in the next video, and I'll probably get that one out later today. So if you have any questions, please comment, and also please share if you found this stuff interesting. So thank you.